Saffet Bekiroglu is an associate at Zaha Hadid Architects and leads the architect of projects on a variety of scales, among them the Aquatic Center for London's 2012 Olympics, the Kartal Master Plan Istanbul, and the critically acclaimed Aqua Table. Prior to joining ZHA, he graduated cum laude from UCLA and worked at Frank Gehry Associates. His interest lies in the expression of smart surfaces informed by performative conditions and contextual data, organizing a project multiples order into architectural landscapes. Saffet is a regular visiting critic and occasional tutor at various international architecture schools. With that, please welcome Saffet Bekiroglu.
Thank you very much for coming. First of all, I would like to thank Reg for inviting me and making it possible. It's been 5 years since I moved to London, and I studied here and I was working here, so there's lots of familiar faces, and it's great to be back. Now I am part of Zaha Hadid Architects. I would like to talk a little bit about Zaha. And Zaha, as you guys know, she's from Baghdad, Iraq, and she did her earlier studies in Beirut, Lebanon, and then later she was studied architecture in Architectural Association in London. Zaha has been an academic. I mean, she established her office 30 years ago, I think, in 80s. And what's interesting about Zaha's practice is that because she was an academic and she was somehow with her academic research complement her practice which ran parallel, and that's why I think from the start there was always a culture of innovation embedded inside of the practice. Currently there's still some of the senior staff still practices in certain schools in US, Yale, AA, Vienna, and actually most of the staff which comes to our design studio is from these schools. I wasn't Zaha's Nordic student, so, but you know, it's a very open environment. Another interesting about the office is that it's very international. We're around 300 people, and there's people from all parts of the world, from Peru to Japan, India, and like anything you like. I find it interesting because that we, of course, try to communicate through English, and it's sometimes difficult, but then what I want to try to get at is that somehow our design becomes the language for us to communicate. And when you look at Zaha's, what Zaha's design tries to do, it tries to communicate, make a statement, insert a mood, dynamism, forces the user to react and relate, and to awake curiosity, senses, tactile and visually, try to stimulate and try to provoke. There's always been a consistent interest or focus of Zaha. And Zaha Hadid Architects, of course, this is constantly evolving. Main subject surface as a landscape, architecture as a topography, fluid space, surface as continuous variation, and you can, from her early paintings, which was a unique way of representing her architectural vision, you can see in her paintings the dynamism and the explosions, field condition, distorted perspective. So, but of course, through the years, and there wasn't computers then, through the years, coming new designers and contribution of many, work evolved. Another thing which is important for us, or for me, is that if we try to summarize it, we try to come out with deliver solutions which is unconventional, playful, elegant, daring, with grand gestures. I put together a presentation. I'm going to go through very fast because I'm supposed to have half an hour, but it might stretch to 40 minutes. I'm going to show some built works, some of them, and talk very briefly about it, and then later, and I'm going to talk about the projects that I've been leading last for 5 years in London. This is Cincinnati Museum, you know. It's temporary exhibitions in general. It's where the surface comes here. You can see how the street level comes and falls, and somehow when you're walking horizontal, then you start circling upwards to stacked up museums through a canyon. This is Wolfsburg. It's in Germany. It's a science museum. Interesting thing about this is an elevated building because they wanted to continue the existing circulation of the city. Behind this, there's a bridge and train tracks, and I find this pixelation of the window openings is a very strong, I think, it's associated with the design. This is what I was saying, that somehow building works as a like a canopy for a public space underneath. These are structural cones where you take escalators to go up. This is in Denmark, small museum. As you see, the surface is folding, creating an envelope. And this is Chanel Traveling Pavilion. It's commissioned by Chanel. The whole point of this mobile exhibition is to display artwork which is inspired by Chanel. We launched this in Hong Kong. That's where this image is from. Then it was in Tokyo, and it was in summer in Hyde Park, New York. After this, it's going to go to Paris, and in summer, it's going to be in London. What's interesting about it, how you can assemble it and disassemble it. This is a hotel interior in Madrid, Porte American. This hotel developer somehow commissioned all these acknowledged designers or architects to design one level just with their vision, and Zaha's design was to do this simplest architectural landscape which flows into and it becomes a bed, it becomes this furniture. Later you will see the restroom. And this is a material Corian. The interesting thing about Corian is that through heating, you can somehow make a seamless, continuous surface. And you shape it through heating as well. And this is in Germany again, in Leipzig. It's BMW, for BMW. What's interesting about this project is that it exists between already existing different factory plants, or let's say offices, and the idea is to somehow bring in different departments which works along the phase of production of the BMW together. So it's like an interwoven, let's say, how this is like on the right, you can see the administration offices, accountants, or whatever you call it, and then here is totally the physical labor fabrication of the car. You can see here how like different, let's say, professionals, that's in US you call it blue collar versus white collar getting together. And I think socially it's very interesting. And this is, it's in Innsbruck in Austria, and it's this canopies or the light rail train stations, and it's from glass. It opened this year. And when it snows, actually it blends in and becomes part of the landscape. And this is a bridge in Zaragoza. Zaragoza is the fifth biggest city in in Spain. It's between Barcelona and Madrid. Interesting thing about this being, I find it interesting because like it's an infrastructural building, so it's actually circulation, people crossing the river, but at the same time when you look inside there is galleries for temporary exhibition. So that's where multiplicity and double aspect of this kind of architecture becomes interesting. It's open this summer for the fair. Well, I never work any of these projects, which I show you, but now I'm going to show you what I've been working on. And we have David Gerber in the house, who was working in Zaha, so if you catch him after this, he can tell you in detail about the built work. Aqua table. I don't know why, but it's a low resolution. For me, design is a solution and is a result of a need. And the first thing, let's say, I asked, like in products especially, the first thing I ask to myself, when I'm designing something, okay, what is the generic, let's say, characteristic of this typology? And then I start questioning it. Let's say in a table, what is a table? Table is in general, if you ask, it's a rectangle flat surface with 4 legs at the corner, and flat surface is level. So in a way, going and starting from why it's like that, it forces you to think and try to kind of see from a different angle. And of course, these are pieces not for because they're limited pieces or they're limited in number. It's more expensive. As you know, with extrusion within the industry of fabrication makes things cheaper. But maybe technology at some point becomes much more accessible and cheaper, so we can make these kind of products more easy to fabricate and sell in a cheaper price. So what I did, I take first of all, I take a certain surface and then try to see if I can embed everything to it. So by taking a surface and making self-intersecting, I created these legs, but at the same time, then the next thing is maybe it's to try to give different condition with the product. Like one side is concave, one side is convex. You try to somehow create a different condition adjacency to the user. I included some fabrication images. It's very important, I think, to see what goes behind it, because I think somehow you need to be very familiar with the fabrication technology, with the material, because I think you, during the process, find the hidden potential of the, let's say, material technique, and then that somehow forces you to use the, pushing the limits. I mean, many of us, of course, some of us is using the same softwares and technology and materials. Another thing which I was questioning, why a table needs to be flat. I was thinking, like, we are all at different heights, so maybe it's interesting to do a table which is not flat, and then so people with their heights somehow find their own corner in relation to, like, if they're more taller, they sit in the more higher part. But then, of course, when you go with this idea, you need somehow, when you put something on it, you need to make sure that it stands and it doesn't go down. And so it forces you to think during the process. What I'm trying to get at is that, when we started to design this table, you don't know from the start that, oh yes, it's not going to be a flat and it's going to have a silicon on top. And so so it can work. During the process, I think these things you invent, and somehow at the end everything falls into place. So the idea of using silicon, which was a good idea, because it allows you to have a different height, and at the same time it was soft padded, which was more friendly to use. And then when you start working with silicon, you realize that there's a certain, let's say, transparency, and then the idea of when you put it on top, that at deeper places you realize that it's more darker. So it's like a water. When you look at it, if it's darker, you know there's more depth, and as you come to the shore, it gets lighter. So all these aesthetics, start playing a role. And then, besides computer, I'm not myself, any fan of any medium through designing. I think you can use computer, hand sketching, paper, whatever. Like you could have done most probably this table by using basswood and using splines. Or like as you see here, we didn't have the silicone, but we were already pouring like a milk or whatever just to see what kind of effect it has. So I think during process, whatever the designer is comfortable with, or they can think that they can get whatever in their head, they can get to that result as soon as possible, that I think they're free to use whatever method they want. In my case, I generally repeatedly model, print, sketch, and then model again, and because I believe somehow when you're hand sketching, what's interesting, somehow when you're freehand sketching, there's a certain hand movement, and with the link between the artistic eye is directly connected, which it doesn't go sometimes through your head. So you suddenly, when you constantly keep on doing this, somehow during this very intense design process, it's like being in a trance. Suddenly your intuition kicks in, and then you, with a certain prioritized criteria, you think you find the right solution, and then you just go with it. But it's not like you learn as you're doing. But I think it's very important to go with an open end to the design process, so that there's a room for innovation. That's what I'm trying to get at. I like this image because it shows like that we see it as a topographical map. And other thing, during the process, I realized that, okay, what happens if you don't use the silicon? And then the idea of, let's say, having these dips or valleys, it reminded me it's like inserted balls. Instead of putting a ball on top of this table, it's a ball embedded like a valley, and you can put your fruits or whatsoever. So what does it mean? A one single surface being at the same time, but self-intersecting, having legs on the top. Anyway, it pulls in, and then it can be for another use. Of course, that the perimeter is level, so you can eat and dine properly. This is we did this red version for the Red Charity, which goes to AIDS, that I think Bono was leading. You can see in the sections the self-inflecting surface. The other thing, we were talking about dynamism, trying to put a mood. For me, what is important is that how you try to, make it feel alive, and trying to have a somehow built-in energy. I call it built-in motion or implied movement with, of course, surfaces, directionalities like the table's leaning forward and you know, this NURB surfacing. You guys familiar with the vectors? So actually, if you guys want to buy the table, please contact us, and we can give you a discount. It comes in black, white, and red, with blue and white silicone top. Okay. After that, I think I need to tell you the lecture or the projects that I'm going to show. Somehow I put it in such a way that it varies in scale and use. So we're starting with a product, furniture. There's an installation. There's architecture and urban planning. So it's, you know, it's more how, although they're totally different, have a certain vision and certain discipline reflects in different scale and how the design process change. Elastica is an installation we did in Miami, I think 3 years ago. And I don't know if you guys, there's actually currently it's happening, Art Basel, Miami, you know, it's happening right now. And they came to us and said, okay, can you guys make an installation? And there's a Moore building in the design district. For me, the first thing to look is the strong Cartesian setup of the space. I mean, you can see horizontal slabs and the vertical columns and the atrium in the middle. So the first thing came to my mind is like, how can you complement this at the same time do something additional to this which is not similar and somehow charge the space? So taking the, let's say, planes or Cartesian setup and trying to do this oblique diagonal stretches, we call this a chewing gum formula, and try to connect the different levels. And it's very light because it's hanging in the atrium space. And that's what I was telling you. Somehow there's a built dynamism or movement. So it's like 2 points, you're just stretching it. And it's looking from down. And this fabrication images. There's a, and this is, hang on, I don't know if you guys saw this. It's still on, and like they sometimes do projections and events and underneath. So it's totally not in an aggressive way, but it totally brought another energy or mood to the space. Where we questioned it here, how can you create something in an existing environment, was actually the study in this in the previous project. What I'm going to show you now is a Mesa table, which is interesting and relevant to the previous project because taking the same idea of stretching between Cartesian planes, we thought, you know, wait a minute, it's interesting to how you can actually take it and use it in another scale. This is a table we did for Vitra last year or the year before we launched it. So if you look at here, this time we have a flat top. And what was interesting, structurally how the under the legs or branches under the table somehow was stretching from one side to another side, and they're all actually getting together in the bottom. And this is like it might look very visionary and new, but actually, if you look at the water lily plant, it's it exists, but it's when you're designing, you don't say, oh, I want to design a water lily. It's just everything falls to each other later. You just realize all these like flat leaves at the top of the water, and then underneath, when you look, it's all branches, and it just came to me after, when it's completing. Another thing which was interesting about this, the top wasn't like this, but the idea of somehow, let's say, as a design authorship, we thought what can be interesting is that, like, when you look to the bottom of the table, the relationship between solids and voids inverses when you go to the top. So the same aesthetic somehow, figure ground, background, just inverses. which is interesting. Fabrication images. I need to go through fast. These are in a Vitra fabrication location. I always like to show the fabricators because I think you learn a lot from them. I love this image because it's like a wild animal and they're trying to tame it. I think isn't it?
What's the medium?
You mean material? Polyurethane, and there's special coating. But you see, the thing is, Vitra doesn't want to tell the secret.
Oh no, I'm curious.
So I don't know truly because they want to keep it. They have a fantastic furniture fabrication plant. We did another color. We call it golden lime. We launched it in Milan last year. I don't know if it came to US already. And the other thing about this table is that, on the table you put like a table mat, like a cloth that you put your plate. I think it works with that idea to somehow you can territorize your own corner, and then... Huh? 5 what? Well, I didn't even get to the half. Okay, faster. This is, I like this image too. It reminds me the topography of map image of the aqua table. It's like the same landscape. It's like a painting, and I put it because I really like this image, and the reflection and how it deforms the surrounding. Okay, faster. This is a chandelier we did for Establish & Sons. What's interesting about it, actually, trying to create a solid with points, and we call it swarm. And I think it's interesting because when you walk around it, it's kind of the perimeter of it constantly changes, and it's difficult to. It's like an illusion. It's difficult to get an understanding of it and what's in the front and what's at the back. You can see the scale. And this is another chandelier. We did this for Swarovski. What's interesting thing about it is that, we're talking about surfaces. We created a surface, not by not doing actually a surface, but just stretching wires and ruled wires, and it works like a surface. Okay, a little bit of architecture. This is Heydar Aliyev Center in Azerbaijan, and it's a culture center. It has 3 major program in it. One of them is auditorium for convention center. The other one is museum. You can see it here. This is museum. This is convention center. So you can imagine the laid-back auditorium. And at the back, which is facing the north, is the library. So imagine a surface, and there are certain, let's say, identified singularities, which kind of gives you a hint of that it created from 3 components. The idea was that because it's a public building, taking the plaza as a landscape, architectural landscape, and it undulates and creates an architectural envelope, and then later when it goes in, you will see that it folds in back and it creates an architectural landscape inside that becomes actually slabs. You see it folds in, there's a courtyard inside, and then it works as a structural cone. There you can see, this is the earlier plan, but this is the auditorium, this is a multipurpose hall, library, then it grows bigger. There's a bow from here to the museum entrance, and this is where the museum is. We're, of course, to make openings, we're using this bifurcation method that, like as you saw it in the first slide, it bifurcates and you start creating these slots as openings. We developed this interior skin with an acoustician, which tried to function as reflecting the sound in the right direction. When we talk about surface in such a big scale, we have to start talk about seams, because let's say when you look at the hotel room, you can do a seamless surface, but when things get this big, you cannot do it seamless, because First of all, there's seismic forces that building needs to move. The panels come to a certain size, and at the same time, the handling of a panel, handling of a panel as a construction worker needs to be manageable. You can make it bigger, but the people cannot easily use it. So instead of ignoring it, then we start designing the seams, and somehow I like seams because the other thing with seams is that, like, somehow if you make a very smooth surface, it's difficult to see the, let's say, musical rhythm. Like with here, you can see how the continuous variation take place. So this is a diagram from. Okay, we wanted to use a material where you can use on the plaza and at the same time use it on the envelope. So we're going to make the project from GRFC, which is glass reinforced fiber concrete. But of course, depending on if it's flat or single curved or double curved, it has a totally different cost. So what we did, we made a study seeing, let's say, when you have two panels, and then if they're like a 1 degree or 2 degree, human eye cannot see the difference. It reads smooth. So we just try to minimize the use of double and single curvatures and try to have a smooth understanding and sensation when you look at the building. But at the same time, we tricked. Trying to rationalize it. You can see the thing here. And at the end, we came up with this. This diagram shows you what needs to be single, double, and flat panels. And this is like all, you can directly send it to the fabricator, and then they come and install it. So you can do actually good cost estimate. Of course, here we're using parametric tools to be able to do this rationalizing surfaces, and it's actually you cannot do this kind of stuff by hand. So it's knowing computer somehow helping so much to achieve your, let's say, and make it more efficient, your intentions. So this is like a basic, I can show you a little bit insight for architects. There's we have the steel ribs, and then we have cladding rails, and then on top of cladding rails we have cladding frames, which holds the GRFC, and it's like open range screen envelopes skin system. The project is under construction. We're, I think, at the ground level. This was taken, I think, a month ago. They're going so fast. And then this is like actually where the auditorium is. But now we're at the ground level. With this, it looks like the year or two, we're intending to finish it. But let's see how the economical crisis is going to reflect on our project. But so far, one of the advantages of being in, let's say, running such an international office is that like we have projects all over, from China to I don't know, India, Spain, name all the countries, because somehow when the economy is not going good, you can always, it's a very heterogeneous setup, so you can always, it didn't affect us as bad as I think it affected the US offices. This is like the much earlier animation, and of course it's changed a lot. We have more structural cones coming down, you'll see. Then what is maybe interesting to talk about, I think architecture and urban design are more contextual driven, because you need to deal with the existing infrastructure, you need to relate to the circulation, the directionality of the light, the wind forces. It's much more contextual driven. On the contrary, or in different to product design, you can develop your design in a more abstract, more generic environment, but somehow it's much more stronger, have a relationship to the human body and use. So this is the last project. So Rich is that Kartalpendik master plan, which I think did 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, years past, I don't remember anymore. 3 years ago, and it was a competition, and we won it. It's in Istanbul. It's a beautiful city. I did my diploma there, so I advise everybody to go there. What is interesting right now, like with the office, is its international crowd, and then we're 300 people, okay, and from all over, and like with what's happening, there's, I think, somehow with the globalization, internet, cheap flights, and people, I think, traveling to have their education in another country. I think there's a certain, even more common understanding of certain international aesthetics. But at the same time, like when global aesthetics, but at the same time, when things going that direction, what happens does this mean that the design is becoming more generic in relation to culture? So I would like to talk a little bit about that in this project. So this is the Marmara Sea. This is the coastal highway, this existing infrastructure. This is Sabiha Gökçe Airport, highway, and these are the Princess Islands, which makes it, this is in the Asia side of Istanbul. You see, the population drastically grows so much that, like, I think it's like between 16 to 20 million. At night it becomes 16, and at daytime it becomes 20. So what's happening? This used to be an industrial area. You see, there used to be a quarry here, and these were all the factories. And there used to be 2 small fishing villages. But now, because the industry had to move out, because there's a need for people to build residentials. So the project was there's the Princess Islands, and as you can see, the residentials and the industrial zone. So the industrial zone that you're seeing in the middle is migrating out. So what needs to be done? Now industrial zone works like an obstacle. It's not permeable. The urban fabric doesn't continue. So first thing we had to do when we take this out, to see and take the existing circulation and trying to stitch 2 sides together. So make sure that the urban fabric is continuous. And then we start making these studies, and you can see it here. These are the major spines of the existing infrastructure. You see, continuous existing roads, and then stitching together. Then we had to come up with a system which we went for a grid, and a grid is like a non-hierarchy. Somehow it's flexible. I mean, in US it's where it's born, but somehow grid is very generic. So what we did, we came up with the soft grid, because what soft grid does allows you to somehow you put the grid, but then you plug in, and then and where's adjacency, it helps you to form, so it doesn't become like it suddenly came and dropped there, but it's a continuation of the existing. At the same time, I mean, in LA, you have a downtown and high buildings, and then there's residentials. I think in this kind of more old cities, it's important maybe the way the culture is that it's more mixed use. People like to live and shop and work at the same area, so it's not like a segregated, so different functions. So with this grid, soft grid, you can see that we can come up with different sizes. So it works as a whole, but at the same time, it needs to be flexible enough to a certain program. Like big one can be, let's say, I don't know, stadium or a mall, but like you can have a residential tower like that. So this is, of course, all abstract urban studies. You see, you can look more detailed inside, but within itself, a block, it can have sub-blocks, and then you can have sometimes different building typologies, which we're going to look later on. So I was talking about with this international global aesthetics and this softwares and everybody's using. So besides, like, we were trying to be contextual by taking the existing infrastructure and circulation, but culturally, what does it mean? I think instead of going and doing a mimicry or of what was Istanbulian, we were looking at the principles, design principles. If you're familiar with Istanbul, there's an old city where Mimar Sinan landscape is created with like this pinched minarets and the skyline and the dome. So, which is like it's kind of landscape which is skyscraping. So we started to instead of making a flat monotone carpet, we started to pinch and trying to bring skyline to the project. And actually, it's very typical in Istanbul because of its. If you look at this mosque and minaret skyline, it somehow takes that as an inspiration, and it's a maybe contemporary version of delivering it. So when you look at it, it works as a continuous. At the same time, you can see that there's a variation built in it. Here, with a different building typology, L-shaped. The other one was like a complete circle with a void inside. So what I like about this animation is that when you look at it, we're starting to look different building typologies. There's a tower. There's like when it's like a cross, when it's like an L shape. There's different planar profiles. The important thing is here how you can create something flexible, and somehow everything works as a whole without repeating. But there's a variation, but somehow as a continuous urban mosaic. So you can see this is one typology, how it transforms to different building typologies. And depending on the function, of course, you can assign different programs. Same thing, I'm talking about how you create a landscape. As you see here, and our way of, let's say, like this can be, let's say, residential, and this like small house, and this can be like an apartment, and this become office, and you can talk with these ideas. Of course, there's different landowners, and we need to collaborate with them to see where is it going. And somehow the other way of creating public spaces is that to actually fade it down, so it creates green area or plazas, but still reads as a continuation. This is the last 3 slides. Okay. Another thing about, let's say, knowing about Istanbul or Turkish culture is like Istanbul was at the peak of its Islamic calligraphy art. So we start taking, we start looking into this calligraphy and how can this aesthetics be reflects on architecture. So what I'm trying to say is that although you're running an international office, you can look into, from an outsider, you can look into the principles and the understanding of that culture and try to interpret in a contemporary way. Okay, I'm going to go faster, a couple of slides. So what computer allows us to do to generate growth. So, and I think smooth transition in this old existing cities and when the new stuff, that it's important to do smooth transition. So that's what I'm saying. You can, like here, You can see what I'm talking about. You can see how the generic grid transform into soft Greek, and then you can pinch up to create some skyline, at the same time pull it down to make a open public space. I said 3 slides, but I forgot to say 3 animations. There you go. So as this soft grid flows on top of the water, and there's a marina there, because water transportation is very important in Istanbul, because it's the fastest way of getting from one side to another side. This shows some infrastructural stuff. And just a couple of slides. We kept the existing spline, but of course, it's an urban project, and it's going to take a while to, be finished and keep running. So spine is the major activation, and this is where the 2 highway junction is. So this is one zone, because people can come and then work and then go back without getting into the deep inside to the region. And here the marina comes, the water transportation. At the same time, there's a coastal highway and train. So we're going to make a train station there, which is another focal point for within the phasing of the project. This is used to be a quarry. What is interesting now, it created somehow became a lake. Yeah, and that's it. So, thank you.
Great.
Well, I guess the conclusion is, let's say, being such an international office and being with so much international crowd coming from different cultures, you just realize the common similarities, and then that's then you I guess contribute with an international understanding at the same time, without one needs to be careful not being generic. Okay, that's it.